It's Wednesday, the 22nd of December, 1926, and the bells of St Hilary ring out, not just for the benefit of the parish. This day, it's something special. St Hilary is broadcasting to the nation. The BBC was still in its infancy, and this was a brave new venture, the first outside broadcast of its kind. But this wasn't the first time that the Nativity play Bethlehem, written by Father Bernard Walke of St Hilary, had been performed. Robert Carnell was in the original cast.
The Nativity play had been performed for 2 or 3 years before it was actually broadcast. They were simply written to be presented in church as an act of worship for the congregation who worshipped here, and of course anyone else who chose to come along.
Well, it must have been right about 1921-22, perhaps, that those very first Nativity plays were first performed here, I suppose.
That's right, yes.
So it would be wrong to describe it as a performance. Father Bernard Walke, vicar of St Hilary, had written the Nativity play Bethlehem intending that it should be performed as an act of worship. Muriel Peters was another member of the cast.
The bishop came and blessed us before we started. It was more of a, well, what shall I say, a prayer. It was devotion, you know, and the players all took it with reverence, something you don't see now. I mean, that was what he wrote it for. And I think that people that heard it and people that saw it felt this. It came over to people that it was devotion and faith.
Did you have prayers and that sort of thing before rehearsals?
Oh, yes. Yes, Father Walke was very, very strict about all that sort of thing. You had to all be on top of things. You know, you weren't allowed to be frivolous or anything like that when we were rehearsing.
The cast was selected from the parish and the surrounding area. These were farmers, housewives, local tradesmen and fishermen, as well as children. Kitty Ellis, or Carnell as she was then, sister to Robert Carnell, was one of those chosen to take part.
We lived a place called Gears. We used to have to come down through the village, down through Galsithne, and then right down through the moors, and rain. If it was rain, the water was everywhere, you know. A couple of miles, I suppose. We had to be there, and if you didn't come, he'd soon be down after you, you know, as to what would kill us. And we had to go to Sunday school and all like that with him. He was very strict on things like that. No, every Sunday we used to go to church. Sunday morning, 10 o'clock. Sunday school, church, Sunday school in the afternoon, and church in the evening. You know, all church all day Sundays. But we loved it. I mean, it was just like home to us, St Hilary Church. We used to love going there, practising and that. We used to have lovely times. We used to go in the vicarage first and have a bit of fun. And then, of course, as it got on and we were progressing, we had to go into the church to practice. And we used to do it Sunday afternoons. And we used to be, well, I could tell the play from the first one when it started until the last one that spoke. You knew everybody's part as well as your own, you see, because Mr. Watt would ding it into you. You had to know and had to know. Of course, when you're children, sometimes you get tired and you think, oh, well. I know one Sunday we were there, everybody was doing it wrong, you know, nearly time for broadcasting. And he said to me, where do you live? Where do you live? And we all looked at each other. We didn't know what he meant. I said, down Gears. He said, you're supposed to be in Bethlehem. And, you know, it was so funny, and I never forgot it, because we weren't very old. And that's the kind of thing that used to go on. And then, of course, when the night came and we had to do this play, and oh, my dear, and we children would be thrilled, because there was never no such thing known out there. And we, living in the country, never went anywhere very much. We came to Penzance, it was like going to London for us, you know. And he used to have us up there, and we used to go through our parts, and everybody said how lovely it was and all like that. I was Rebecca.
Gordon Floyd is another with fond memories of the Nativity plays at St Hilary.
It was really marvellous because Father Walke was like a father to us all, and he put on these plays with the local characters. Nobody else has ever tried that kind of thing, and it was the first thing that was ever done, especially here in Cornwall.
Were there any professional actors?
None whatever. None whatever. He preferred to have the local characters and local dialect. And of course, perhaps people in the north didn't understand the dialect, but even so, we had many people saying how they liked the plays, and it was recorded, and it was done year after year.
So, how did the small parish of St Hilary get national coverage for what was intended originally as a local celebration of the Nativity? Robert Carnell.
The man who really started the whole business was Filson Young. He used to write an article in the Radio Times, The World We Listen In. He used to come and stay at Carbis Bay. And he had a friend who at one time lived down there, I think, and eventually built a house here in St Hilary, a Mrs. Elton. And he used to visit her occasionally, and she told him about this play that she liked so much, and invited him to come along and see it, which he did. Well, he was introduced, of course, to Father Walke, and they became great friends. And he persuaded Father Walke that the play should be broadcast. Of course, at that time, outside broadcasts were largely experimental with the BBC, but this one was a great success. Now then, the question of payment came into it as far as Filson Young was concerned, and Father Walke too, I suppose, but not for the players. The players didn't get paid, never got paid anything at all. The money was to go to the children's home that Father Walke had started here in St Hilary at the Jolly Tinners for destitute children from London. The Jolly Tinners was at one time a pub or an inn. But when there was the decline in mining in the area, there was no population here, and the inn closed. And he eventually bought it and used it for this home. And he had, I don't know, perhaps a dozen children there at one time and another. Some of them had been perhaps in a little bit of trouble or something like that. But they were very good children on the whole. They had to go to church. They became servers and took part in the church activities generally. They went to the local school and received the same education as the rest of us. Some of them went on to higher education. Some of them have got good jobs, I believe. Others, well, we don't know anything about them now. Well, the BBC offered Father Walke £100, which was, I suppose, quite a lot of money in those days. But Filson Young said, no, that's not enough. And so they compromised with the BBC that Filson Young should make a 5-minute appeal before the play on behalf of the home, which he did. And that brought in over £1,000. So it was well worth it. The postman had a job to bring all the bags up from Goldsmithny. And it followed on every year from that time. It was broadcast for about 13 years, I think.
And we were glad of that, because those poor kids, they needed it. You see, that was a reward. I mean, Father Walke didn't make anything out of it. I mean, what he got out of it, it was for the children. As far as I can remember, Filson Young didn't have it altered to suit him, because we did it for the broadcast and also for the public, so that it wasn't possible for them to make too many changes. But I think that was said before it was broadcast, that it was in the Cornish dialect. And I don't think it was so broad that people, English people, couldn't understand it. Anyway, they must have done, because we had lots. We used to have sackfuls of letters from all over the country. I think still a lot of people remember that Bethlehem play.
Muriel Peters. The only recording made of the play was the last performance of Bethlehem in 1934. Incidentally, the reference number of the LP disc in the BBC archives is rather unique in itself. Quite simply, it carries the number LP1. Well, this broadcast was introduced, as were all the others, by Filson Young.
Probably millions of listeners are familiar with the play, but others will be hearing it for the first time, and for their benefit some brief idea of its design may be given. In the first place, it is not an entertainment, but an act of worship, done in a church and preceded by an act of devotion. Secondly, it is not a tableau or stage play, but a kind of pageant moving through the church. The shepherd encampment is at the west end. The home in Bethlehem is the Jesus chapel. The crib is in the north transept, where the culmination of the little drama takes place. The shepherds come there, the mother and children, the dancers with their bells and rhythmic footsteps, and the kings with their gifts and adoration. That is where the play leads you to a baby's cradle in a stable, the simplest of all possible scenes from which to send out the glorious message of Christmas. Tonight, in this remote corner of England, storm-swept by the Atlantic gales, the St Hilary players once more give their version of that message. And on their behalf, I wish all listeners, as I am sure you would like me to wish them, a happy Christmas. And now listen to the bells, which for 500 years have called the people of St Hilary to praise and prayer.
Of course, we used to practice quite a lot for this, and round ringing was the thing then to ring in proper timing, which you don't hear very much of today. You were in the tower waiting for this to happen. The signal was the red light, of course. The white one would come on first. You could count 5. So that'd give you time to get the rope in your hands and your hand on the sally. Afraid that somebody is going to make a bloomer, and then the red one.
Gordon Floyd, who was only a young lad at the time and a member of the bell-ringing team. Once their duties in the tower were over, they then augmented the small choir assembled for the broadcast. Robert Carnell and Muriel Peters can remember the difficulties they faced when first presented with a script.
I remember Father Walke asking us to come and to read the script of the play, or at least our part of the script. And we met over in the schoolroom. And of course, it was all written in longhand. And we couldn't decipher his writing, you see. It was very difficult. But still, Mrs. Walke, known as Annie Walke to her friends, she was over there and she helped us through it. And then we were told to go and learn the part.
We had to learn the pieces off. It was no question of reading it. You were given the paper and you had to learn it. And you'd be able to pick up the cues as they came along. Didn't have any papers. Weren't allowed papers because they'd make a noise.
We had nothing to hold. We had to remember it all.
So what happened then if you forgot your words in the middle of it?
I don't know what would have happened, but we never did. You see, at the end of the prologue, there's what I always consider to be a beautiful prayer. Grant us, dear Lord, the power to act aright, the beauties and the wonders of this blessed night, that all may see the tender mercy and the grace of thy sweet coming to save our fallen race. And it was that helped us to get through. Although we were young, you see, there was that influence. I can remember standing up there and saying the prologue and looking down the church, and Father Walke would be leaning on the font at the back here and looking. So you see, you dare not make a mistake, dare not.
Good Christian people, who have come long ways through the darkness and the cold, we bid you welcome to our play. The play you know, for it was acted first near some 2,000 years ago, with God himself as actor and Bethlehem the stage, man sharing with him the glory in Mary, the blessed mother maid. Tonight we too are actors, mummers of the Lord, no longer merely children, but angels, shepherds, kings. This church is far Judea, the chapel there is home, and yonder is the stable wherein the child was born. We will then set before you the plains of Bethlehem, where shepherds watch their flocks and angels tell his glory. Next you shall then see the family, to whom the shepherds came with news more wondrous fine.
The steady voice of Robert Carnell 52 years ago during that last broadcast of Bethlehem in 1934. But weren't they overawed by the event, the fact that they were broadcasting to the nation?
It didn't bother us one little bit. I suppose we were too young. But it didn't seem to... But we were nervous, you always are, I think, before a performance. If you're not, I don't think you do it very well. But no, that didn't affect us. Didn't affect us at all.
Well, we are here now by the font. Now, the engineers, where were they actually? Because the bell tower is here, and then we have another little chapel, don't we, here in the church itself?
Yes, so that wasn't there in those days. That was put there later on. But the engineers were straight across from the font there, by that west window. And they controlled the whole show from there. They had a host of batteries there at that time, because there was no electricity. And that was their studio, if you like. They had to lay a landline from here to Trevelyan Farm, which is about, half a mile, or it's probably more from the church. And it had to go down a lane, across the field, across the yard, and into the house, and was connected up to a telephone. And from there, it was phoned through, if you like, to Marizion. They had an exchange down there at that time, and then it was sent direct to London, and from there, of course, all over the country. Of course, in a church, one thing they had to get over was the echo, and they did that in a very good way. Of course, the microphones at that time, they were like little alabaster boxes or something, with a oblong slit in the middle with like cellophane or something in front of it, You stood at various distances from the microphone, that you did, you had to. And it was shielded by screens of straw to damp down the effect of the echo.
Well, were they as sensitive, I wonder, as the microphones today? Did you have to shout when you were in front of them?
No, we didn't, no. And myself, I had rather a powerful voice. When we were singing the last hymn, in particular, when we all sang, I had to go at the back of the of the players and look the other way.
So you were really drowning everybody out?
Well, they could hear me above everybody else, let's put it that way. And that's what I had to do. And it was a noble stem of Jesse that they sang. Very beautiful.
And the wiring went all around the church with the microphones hanging from them. It wasn't so much that I was short, but the grown-ups were that much taller than me. I mean, I was only about 8 or 9, but they had to put me on a stool so that I could talk into the microphone. There was another girl, a bit shorter than me. That was Robert's sister. One got up and the other got down, but you had to make sure not to make a noise. And the red light, and not to speak until the green light. No talking, not even coughing. The red light was a warning, and the green light was for starting.
So the red light indicated that you were actually on air, and the green light flicked or twinkled as an indication that you had to start speaking.
Yes.
How about lights in the church?
I think it was all done with candles and oil lamps.
Muriel Peters finding that her lack of height was a distinct disadvantage and only adding to her problems of keeping quiet while she clambered up and down on that stool. Well, one feature of all the plays written by Father Walke and Bethlehem was the forerunner of many others broadcast from St Hilary, was that they were all set in the local area, using familiar place names such as Relubis Moor and so on, as Gordon Floyd explains.
Local names in Plain and Gorey and places like that, which is in the parish, and places he used to visit daily. I don't think he left anything to chance. He thought about it, and he tried to put this in his plays.
How old would you have been in 1926 when the plays were first produced?
Well, I would be about 12 years old, yeah.
And what part did you do in
that? I learned to ring when I was 11 years old. I did ringing. I also was singing in the choir at that time. So that it wasn't until the later ones that I took the speaking parts, which I did very well in every one that was recorded after that. I was one of the people with the shepherds, shepherd boy.
Shall we be there to greet him, Uncle?
Why, bless the boy, I cannot say. Man's time is set by God, who rules the sun. God's time is any time, as the saying goes, neither ended or begun.
I wish it were always springtime.
It will be always springtime, boy, when Messiah do come. The desert shall blossom like the rose. In the habitation of dragons, there shall be grass with reeds and rushes.
Reeds and rushes? Why, down at Relubis Moor, there be any amount of they. Last April gone, I cut a score. Look at this one, Uncle, and hearken how he can play it.
Play up, boy.
I think that probably Father Walke, being in the sort of literary sense connected with so many people, they came and listened to it and were so interested in it that they thought it ought to be broadcast. And namely, I think Filson Young was one of them. Yeah.
What sort of man was Filson Young?
He liked his own way, but even so, everything was St Hilary. Yeah, and he did us a good turn. I'm sure he put us on the map.
Well, you certainly had a lot of visitors after the play, didn't you?
You did, yes. People like Bernard Shaw and a lot of people like that. That's the kind of people we used to have there. I've seen Bernard Shaw as close as I am to you. Yes, I remember him coming there on a Sunday morning. I think he came to see the play. I think possibly he came to see Father Walke because I suppose he felt that they had something in common.
It was certainly a testing time for all those taking part, including Muriel Peters.
We were all having the jitters, I think, really, because after you've done it once or twice, it wasn't so frightening, but at the time you were in awe of it all, because it was something that didn't happen around this place, not around Cornwall anyway, not in those days. That was a very great thing to have a broadcast from little St Hilary on the wireless.
Well, how about after the play? Did you find that people came up to you asking for your autograph and that sort of thing?
No, you see, we didn't think of it as being anything like that. You see, it didn't bring us fame because we were simple people. I mean, we didn't feel famous, if you understand. I mean, things weren't like they are today. We accepted it as an act of devotion, and we didn't want anything, fame or fortune out of it. It wasn't our style. We were brought up to accept these things. I had a tin of Jackie Coogan boiled sweets sent to me from one of the listeners for the little girl who said shall we be meeting angels walking on the way? And I also had a picture with Jesus amongst the animals, and at the bottom was another of my lines, a little child shall lead them.
But when Messiah shall come, all will be changed, for he hath said, I will make a new heaven and a new earth. The wolf and the lamb shall feed together, and a little child shall lead them.
A little child shall lead them? Will he be a child like one of us?
A child like one of you, for a maiden of our race shall be his mother. The prophet hath said, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son.
So what was the atmosphere like once the broadcast was over? I asked Muriel Peters if there were any celebrations.
Not until we got out of church. We went into the vicarage and had a party, and we had a real good time then. And Father Walke would get word from the BBC to say how it had gone over, and it was all a sense and sigh of relief that it all went through.
After one broadcast, a message came through from Sir John Breath, the director of the BBC, saying that the Prime Minister, Mr Ramsay MacDonald, had been dining with him and that they'd listened to the play together and wished to thank the players for their beautiful presentation of the Nativity. Kitty Ellis remembers another person who made a large contribution to those Nativity plays.
Mrs Walke, Bernard Walke's wife, she was a lovely person. When we were doing these plays, she used to come and dress us, you know. And I remember I had curls, still back curls on my head back, and she used to come and tie them up and put this red scarf around my head for me. You know, she was ever so kind and nice. I used to like her very much. I was 11, I think, or 11 and a half.
So I suppose really when that broadcast had finished, you were eager to get home to see what Mum and Dad thought about it.
Well, they didn't hear it, you see, because we had no wireless or nothing. See, because we lived in the country. We never had anything like that. We never had any electric light where we lived, you see. Never saw electric light till we came to Penzance. Those that did have it, of course, were thrilled. I can remember Canon Rogers, he lived in the manor house in Gilsithney, and when I was going to school the next week, he saw me. He was coming back from communion in the morning, and he said, oh, you were lovely last night. You were lovely. So he must have heard it, you see.
Well, as a child, did you realise that you were broadcasting to the whole country?
Well, yes, I think we did, because we were told, you know, everybody will hear this. This is going to London and all around, you know, everybody's going to hear it. And of course, we thought we were some special going to do things like that. You can imagine it, can't you? I mean, children in the country like we were, and then everybody in London going to hear our voices. I mean, that was a big thing for us. Oh, yes, I think we realised that. And then after it was all over, perhaps a week after, Mr Walke gave a big party for us. And we looked forward to that too. Yes, we had this big party. It was lovely. Proper Christmas party, you know.
What do you remember most about Father Bernard Walke?
Well, he was like really a father figure. If we were sick, he came to see us, and when we went to church or anything, he was always there to take interest in us. I think if anybody had any problems, they would go to him, because I think he would understand. And when we used to go to communion on Sunday mornings, of course, we were small, but young, and it was too far for us to go back for breakfast, and we always used to go into the vicarage and have boiled eggs. Yes. And, you know, then afterwards, before Sunday school, we could play in the grounds of the vicarage, and we thought that was lovely.
Anybody in trouble or need were always welcome at the vicarage at St Hilary, and as Gordon Floyd told me, those with no fixed address, the gentlemen of the road, were never turned away from Father Bernard Walke's door.
They knew him, and wherever they saw him, they would hail him and ask for anything that they needed, such as a jacket or something to go on their feet, or perhaps something to go in their belly. And this was always came forth for them. And I'm sure they told one another, they must have done, because they soon came round. After one had been, some of the rest came around as well. Of course, they were hard times. Oftentimes, they would sleep in his greenhouse. And he would look out to the window early in the morning. Perhaps it might be raining or it may be sunshine. And he'd see them in this greenhouse. He knew they were there. And he didn't attempt to drive them away or anything like that. He used to say to his housekeeper, get breakfast for so many. They would come and have breakfast with him, and he would see to their needs, and off they would go. I actually saw him once take the shoes off his feet and give to a man. Yes. He was riding a horse at the time, so he wasn't walking on the road. Yeah.
What did Annie Walke make of this, do you think? Her husband coming home continually without his shoes or without his socks?
Well, I wouldn't think she would know anything about that, because he was a man that wouldn't broadcast what he'd done. No, I doubt very much whether she'd know anything about that.
Yeah. He kept it quiet.
Oh yes. But often people from perhaps another parish, some of them well-to-do people perhaps, they were so fond of him, although they didn't actually come to his church. They would come to the vicarage and perhaps leave a bottle of wine or chicken or something on the table, and off they would go. You know, that admired him, but probably didn't quite come to terms with his service, which, looking at it now, it's exactly the same service as what we got today. He was many years ahead of his time, and that's all we can say about it.
A family friend and regular visitor to the vicarage was Dr. Dorothy Chown, who also remembers Father Walke's generosity.
You know, he brought a whole family into the vicarage one time. He found that, what was the circumstance? They were very poor, these people, and they had a sick child. And he was really upset to see the conditions under which they were living, and he had them come to the vicarage. They came, brought all their goods with them, and the vicarage was huge, and they settled in part of the vicarage.
Indirectly, the publicity given to the Nativity plays aggravated the critics of Father Bernard Walke's Anglo-Catholic activities. St Hilary by this time had become what is termed High Church, which created opposition, particularly from those who sought the Protestant form of worship. Robert Carnell.
Father Walke, he introduced the High Church. He removed the pews from the south aisle and made it into a little chapel. And he also had the organ removed to the back of the church at the north end, where it is now. And that didn't go down very well, as I understand it, with a lot of the parishioners. And of course, quite a number of them, not all of them parishioners, didn't like the High Church way of going on. And so, quite a number of them left. But very soon, a new congregation was built up, and the church was very, very well patronized all the time that he was here.
Annie Walke was an artist and had many artists as friends. People like A.J. Munnings, Ernest and Dodd Proctor, Harold and Laura Knight, Alethea Garston and Gladys Hines. They were all working in Newlyn and the Penwith Peninsula, and they all contributed at some time or another to the interior decoration of St Hilary Church, not always with official approval, as Dr. Dorothy Chown told me.
Well, he was really quite naughty as regards the Church of England. He put things in the church without permission from the authorities. He didn't bother with that. And he just got all these ornaments, and he got all his artist friends to do paintings in the church. And then there were some very Protestant people around, and they tried to disrupt all this. I went there one Sunday, I went to Mass. Well, he would come down the aisle with the asperges, you know, and two ladies sitting in front of me. One was dressed all in brown and the other was dressed all in blue, and he came along with his asperges, and they brought out their handkerchiefs. They had handkerchiefs to match their costumes, and wiped their hands, wiping off the holy water.
Showing their disapproval.
Yes. But I know that some of them were not even church people, but they joined in this fracas. I was very well aware of all the trouble he'd got in the church, and he was expecting this awful raid to happen. And he had a 15th century St. Joseph, a wooden one. It was very precious, and he'd got a 15th century Madonna, and he was afraid that if these raiders came, they might break them or do something to them.
Things came to a head in 1932. Robert Carnell takes up the story.
It came about in this way. St Hilary had become very well known. throughout the country because of the plays. It was also very well known that it was an Anglo-Catholic church, and that high church practices were carried on here. And the Protestant Truth Society, the Kensits, as they were known as, they got hold of this and decided to take some action. Now, they were based, I believe, in London. Well, the thing came to a head when after they'd got the order for the removal of the statues and the stone altar. Now, of course, that was common in those days, that people in St Hilary, or attended St Hilary Church, worshipped the Virgin Mary, worshipped the statues, idols they called them, you see. But of course that was never the case. And nothing was farther from the truth than that. These statues are just like, in a sense, pictures which you might have in your own home of your parents or someone. It's something by which you're reminded of them. That's all they amount to. Never worshipping the statues at all. And with regard to the Blessed Virgin, members of the Catholic fraternity, that's the High Church fraternity, they regard the Blessed Virgin Mary as the chief among women, someone to be looked up to, not to be worshipped, because she was the mother of our Lord.
So what did they do? Did they come in the middle of a service and break these statues down? Or?
No, they did not. They didn't do that. There weren't enough people, I suppose, in the parish who would be prepared to come and do that sort of kind of thing. I don't know whether there were any in the parish, actually, or very few, who would actually come here and do what they did. So they procured a busload of people, men. Someone said they came from Plymouth, but they came from somewhere, up country a bit, and they got in through the door near the east end on the north side, in the corner almost there. And poor old Mr. Hopes was in church at the time, and there was a signal, 3 knocks on the door, and you opened it because someone, well, they knew the 3 knocks, somebody did, and they came in as someone wanting to look around the church. When they got inside, they overpowered Hopes and opened the door. And in they came with their pickaxes and bars and all that, broke down the altar and took out the statues.
On the 10th of August 1932, the headlines in the national dailies broke the news.
Crowbar raid on a church. The Kensitites at St Hilary. Ornaments smashed and carried off. Vicar a prisoner. The beautiful reredos at the back of the altar, designed by Ernest Proctor ARA, was destroyed and the canopy torn down. 2 tabernacles were removed, the Venetian bracket supporting the image of St Joseph was dug out of the wall, and images of St Anne and Our Lady removed. The 15th century font was smashed, and the plinth at the foot of the memorial to Canon Rogers, a former vicar of Penzance, was broken.
Well, you see, Father Walke, he realized beforehand what might eventually happen one day, and so the statues had been replaced with replicas. So the statues you see here now are statues which they should have had but didn't.
Despite these troubles, Muriel Peters doesn't think that Bernard Walke, although saddened by these events, had any regrets.
I don't think he regretted that one iota of it. I don't think he did. Those same people he would have helped and did help. This is what I could never understand. Those same people he would help. If he met them on the road, he would help them. That was the kind of man he was. I've never known him to bear a grudge against anybody.
And yet they came in and more or less destroyed his church.
Yes, nearly broke his heart, that did. My husband was in the church at the time. He was he wasn't very old. Young man. You see, they knew that something was going to happen. They kept the church locked. and Norman and Father Walke and a man called Oates was in the church, and there was a knock on the little door, and they thought somebody come to have a look around, and somebody went and opened the door and they were overpowered. Still, most of them are gone, and the church survived, but Father Walke didn't. He left soon after that and went to retired and went to Mevergizzy. We used to go Mevergizzy and do some of the other plays.
These events eventually played on Bernard Walke's health. Dr. Dorothy Chown's father was looking after him at the time.
It really got him down. He got tuberculosis, you know. And he had this children's home. They were sent down from the law courts in London, from the children's courts. And when he realised that he couldn't carry on there, he arranged for the children to go to Walsingham. And the people at Walsingham were very glad to have, at any rate the boys, they put up with the girls, they were very glad to have the boys to act as servers and such like in the abbey at Walsingham. And he asked me to go with Miss Treby, who was the matron. He asked us to go up to Walsingham to see what accommodation there was going to be for the children. And she and I went up one weekend, and it was all satisfactory, and so the children went. And then, as I say, he went down with tuberculosis and was admitted into Tehidin, which was nice in a way that my father had been his doctor at St Hilary, and my father was still running the sanatorium. And his book that he wrote, he started it at Tehidin. In fact, he mentions it in the very first chapter, I think.
This was the book, 20 Years at St Hilary.
Well, after a while, he got very much better. He didn't get as much religion there as he would like. And I knew of a sanatorium in Somerset that was run by some Anglican nuns. And he applied to go there, and he got there. He had a great sense of humour. He was great fun. And Annie Walke, she was shy. I think she was a bit deaf. She hardly entered into the conversation. She did quite a lot of the paintings that were in the church, you know. He taught me how to use the rosary. He would have become a Roman Catholic, you know, only he didn't want to give up functioning himself. And afterwards, when he was at Mevergizzy, Mrs. Walke became a Roman Catholic. And he still didn't until, I think, on his deathbed, I think he was received into the Roman Church.
And so we come to the end of our story that started 60 years ago on the 22nd of December, 1926. Bernard Walke wrote other plays that were also performed and broadcast by the players at St Hilary, but it was the very first broadcast of the Nativity play Bethlehem that proved such a landmark for both St Hilary and the BBC. Well, let us then end with Godfrey Floyd and Muriel Peters as they sum up their thoughts this Christmas, 60 years after the event.
I can think of no other vicar we've had since then would have been able to do what Father Walke had done. I'm sure that had he had his health and strength and was allowed to carry on at St Hilary, we would have had many, many more broadcasts.
The very happiest time of my life being at St Hilary in those years when we were at St Hilary and Father Walke was there. And they were happy times. And we were all like a family. And I often wish I could put the clock back.
There was no other man like him because he had such qualities. He loved children and he loved people. Very unselfish, and I could tell you a lot of stories, I know. And those kind of things will live with me until I die, because you cannot forget them. You cannot, because they stand out so much in your mind.